and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Friday weekend edition. I don't know how your day's going, but things have changed a little bit even since we planned this program. We're going to be talking about the riots in Los Angeles, the upcoming No Kings rally, as well as the celebration of the U.S. Army. Pride Month is another issue we were going to talk about. And then we had a senator from California actually rush the podium, and that has created some stir. And then we, of course, heard that Iran was attacked. Over 100 different targets in Iran attacked by Israel. Some of the top generals have been killed so far. A strategic airport destroyed, and Mossad even established a secret base inside of Iran, right out of a Tom Clancy novel. So we have a little bit more to talk about than we were planning. And of course, we have our two guests from First Liberty Institute, because we want to talk about a couple of these very important cases involving prayer. Jeff Mateer is Executive Vice President at First Liberty Institute. Kelly Shackelford is the president, and also sitting on something else we're going to talk about, the National Religious Liberty Conference and hearings that will be taking place next week.
Yeah, the Presidential Commission, is meeting for the first time on Monday in D.C., and so that'll be a great start. We've never had a Presidential Commission on religious liberty in the United States, and so people can watch. It'll be the Justice Department's going to be streaming it live, but then they can watch it later, and it'll be great. The first one, because it involves leading professors and people talking about what were the founders doing, what are religious freedoms, what does this mean, why is this important. It's kind of a basic for people who want to learn and kind of set the framework for our country.
Yes. Well, let's, if we can, Jeff, talk about the fact that you would have thought that prayer at a city council meeting would not be controversial, and you would be wrong, because that was a case we talked about before. But the first article is good news, because not only will she be allowed to pray, but even allowed to express her opinion. And I did believe we're back to the belief that there's such a thing as free speech.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of we were able to educate a city on what the law is, and the city actually is now going to follow the law. You'll recall, this is the mayor who said, we don't do prayer in Ventura, California. I know we've got California listeners, but that's what on further reflection, they do prayer as they have to do prayer under the Constitution. So it is one of the times when we actually send a letter and educate, and they go to their lawyers. The lawyers look at the law. They realize that the law has been updated since the Coach Kennedy case, and they're going to follow Supreme Court precedent and actually do the right thing.
It's, I would remind people that, or maybe you haven't heard of this case, but it's all on video, number one. And this is a time where citizens get a minute to get up and talk about whatever they want to talk about. And meanwhile, in this one of the guys that got up literally had a puppet bird on his hands, and he would squawk, and then he would interpret. Now, that was okay.
I could have brought a puppet today, and
I wondered if
that would have been better.
Yes.
But with Commissioner Shackelford here, I didn't know if that would have been appropriate.
Right. Since he's on the commission now.
That was okay. But when she said she wanted to pray, that was not okay.
Oh, and they're pounding the gavel and everything.
And booing by some people.
Yes.
So, but, I mean, that's all bad enough. But when the mayor, when an elected government official says, we don't pray here.
Okay.
It's like, boy, maybe they ought to do like a little primer on the Constitution when you come into office there. There's this First Amendment thing. It guarantees free exercise of religion. It also guarantees free speech. And, you can't say, well, you could speak, but not if you're going to say something religious or you're going to pray. And it's just sad because, what the founders did is they actually had prayer when they started their meetings.
Yes.
And now we have people trying to ban it as part of the meetings in any way. So good victory. Good that she stood up and said this is wrong. It's now corrected. I don't think another person who gets up in their free speech time and decides to pray or say something religious will be treated the way she was, but that's all been restored now. And in fact, I don't know when, Jeff, if there's even a plan, but I know she is given the right. She will go back up.
And
she
pray.
will have her minute.
Yeah,
She will
I think
pray
it's
for the
June
city.
26th.
Yeah.
June 26th.
Well, we'll see if we can cover that because, we had Aaron's piece, and of course she was on just a week ago, and so we'll cover that. The first article is a press release on the city of Ventura, California, disavows mayor's claim that we don't do prayer at city council and that. But I thought just before we take a break, there's another prayer case, and this is one, Kelly, we've talked about before, where, again, you can't have prayer before a Christian football game in a stadium that Billy Graham once used for an evangelistic crusade. Am I right?
Yeah, you're right. And, why? Why? You have two Christian schools in the state championship game, and yet they're not allowed to pray. Why? Well, that stadium is owned by the government, and those microphones are owned by the government. And therefore, that would be government speech for them to allow. Well, this is, number one, think of the lunacy of this whole line of thinking. Gosh, you know what? Public sidewalks are government owned too, and public parks, and so I guess we can ban free speech there. Oh, wait, there's a long history in our country of the fact that those are the ultimate places of free speech. And it's, joking aside, it's a really, really dangerous thing when the government comes in and says, we're going to take your private speech and we're going to convert it into government speech. Because what that is really doing is saying you have no rights. We, the government, are speaking. We, the government, are in control. We could say what we want, and therefore you have no right to disagree with us when we decide to shut down religious expression, do all these things. Really, a really disturbing opinion at the Court of Appeals. And, this is a case out of Florida. It's a weird case because you have the Florida High School Athletic Association doing this, which is a state entity.
Yeah.
But you have the governor and the Department of Education, Governor DeSantis, saying, no, this is wrong. So fascinating case and a record. We've had a record number of outside groups that are filing supportive briefs. So hopefully this is something that the Supreme Court will realize they need to take, and if so, it'll be a great case for really protecting free speech and free exercise of religion.
Might just mention that that's a good prayer target because you might want to pray that the Supreme Court will take the case.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, a little bit later, we'll get into some of these others because you had a unanimous ruling where Sonia Sotomayor even said, Catholic Charities is a religious organization. Who knew? Who knew? So we'll get into some of those as well. But I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about Iran and Israel and what is going on there. But a little bit later, you might want to tune in again. We'll get into many of the other religious liberty cases, including some of the things will be on the docket there and the National Religious Liberty Commission gathering together on Monday. Let's take a break. We'll get into some of the issues in the news right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Many of the concerns about the impact of artificial intelligence focus on AI and should instead focus on the human being using it. That is why Christian Schneider warns about the danger of outsourcing our brains. Apparently, many are lazy and quite willing to let AI manage their lives. He says the social media market is now saturated with artificial intelligence-powered social media managers that will take care of the drudgery of posting content, liking other people's photos, and commenting on their post. You can fully automate your online experience and not even have to generate the typical replies of LOL or appropriate emojis. Dating websites are rolling out AI wingmen that write dating profiles for people and contact others. Of course, we have also heard about customized chatbots that can fill the relationship void and the loneliness epidemic. AI makes cheating on college campus even easier. One survey of 1,000 college students discovered that 90% of them had used ChatGPT to help them with their homework. I've even seen one complaint from a student that not only were her fellow students using AI to write papers, but her professors were also using AI to grade those papers and offer comments. Whenever we talked about AI in the past, we feared Skynet and Terminators with glowing eyes. But the real problem is that we decided to stop thinking and creating. We decided to let the machines do the work for us. I'm quite willing to let a machine do hard, dangerous work for me, but I'm not willing to stop thinking and creating so a machine can do it for me. We should be using the gifts God has given us rather than expecting a machine to do our thinking and creating for us. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on biblical reliability, go to viewpoints.info/biblical reliability. Viewpoints.info/biblical reliability. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
One of the articles we've posted by Katie Pavlich, the attack on Iran's nuclear sites has begun. We've got the original story, but then an update as well, in which President Trump said he was made aware of the attacks. But again, more than 100-plus targets hit, top generals killed. We'll get into that in just a minute. A strategic airport destroyed, a secret base by Mossad. Israel strikes inside Iran have begun after the regime refused to give up its quest for a nuclear weapon while continuing to threaten Israel and the United States. And, of course, then it was followed by some drone attacks. One of the arguments being made by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is it was time to act. We can't wait any longer. And in some respects, that's why. So, Kelly, got your thoughts about this, because we've been talking about it for some time. And I like Phil Klein said, we've been talking about this for a long time, but now it's actually happened.
You know, they've gotten a gazillion warnings. Even Donald Trump is trying to work things out, and it shows a little bit of the brilliance last time of Trump drying up their money through the embargoes, which really took away their power to do all these things. But the door kind of got opened, I'd say, by number one, when the Houthis and everybody was doing all these attacks. They kept sort of engaging in terrorism, and they were, of course, funded by Iran. And basically, Israel and the U.S. said, no, we've had enough of this, and took out a lot of their defenses. Well, that makes it really easy if you're like, hey, if you're Israel and you really want to get rid of the nuclear threat that's right next to you of a nation that thinks it would be not only a great thing, but a great thing for them religiously to destroy your country. This is the time to do it, right? And they wouldn't come to an agreement with President Trump on this. Not in the time. I mean, he was still trying to negotiate, and so Israel just decided to take advantage. And pretty much they attacked a lot of places. But I think the thing that was interesting to me is when Israel does this, which they did, they And if you look at all the places they attacked, I mean, it's like over 100 places.
That's correct.
The small number of casualties, right? I mean, these are very pinpointed, scalpel-like. Whereas we're like, what you see with these terrorist groups is they just kill all kinds of innocent people in the process. So there's a purpose for what they're doing. The other interesting thing to me was the response from Khomeini. It was, of course, he's going to say we're gonna have a response. He didn't say we're declaring war. He didn't. It really isn't what you would expect, because I think they're somewhat defenseless right now. Mm-hmm. They
That's
have
the argument.
no ability really to protect themselves from anything else, so they kind of need to be careful. But again, all of this really could have been avoided if President Biden had kept the pressure on the financial side on Iran. You would not have had even the horrible Hamas attack, on Israel that started a lot of these things. But that opened things up, and President Trump and Netanyahu were starting to push back on these terrorist attacks that were going on. That kind of opened the door, and they're proceeding through. I think all of us, I say all of us, have seen the polling already. Republicans are in favor of the attack. Independents are supportive as well. There's only one group that's not, the Democrats. It's like 51% of the Democrats are against this. And the commentator I heard said, they asked him, why do you think that is? And he said, well, I think that if this had been Canada that had a goal of destroying the United States of America, and they were developing nuclear weapons, I said, I have a feeling those numbers would change. So I don't think they know. They're not close to the situation. They don't understand. But the issue is, the question is, does this spread? Do other countries get involved?
Question.
Does it pull America into this? We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, I think President Trump nailed it when asked about it. He said, "Look, it's very simple. It's not complicated. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon." And I think at the end of the day, the Israeli, I mean, look, I think it's pretty well known. The Israeli intelligence service is the best in the world.
Unbelievable.
Is the best in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mossad,
and pulling off this operation, but and my time in government service, I learned this. I mean, sometimes there are a lot of information that is just not, the public just does not know. So so right now we don't know everything that certainly the Israelis know. And I realize the Israelis share a lot with U.S. intelligence service and the British intelligence services, but they don't share everything. And they clearly think that Iran was getting very close.
Yes.
And I've heard reports that maybe it was even hours, that it was that there wasn't, I mean, Israel needed to act now. And the fact that they had, I mean, clearly this wasn't something that just a plan that they thought up in a few hours. I mean, it was well planned, it was well executed. And at the end of the day, I mean, we can't have a world where Iran has a nuclear weapon.
Right. Phil Klein put it this way, that there are three reasons. One, of course, Kelly just talked about the fact that Iran is more vulnerable than it's ever been because last October, Israel really took out Iran's air defense systems and did so without losing a single pilot. There's another comment. Mm-hmm. Number two, different person in the White House. I think we'd all figure that one out. But the third one, back to the point you're just making, is the IAEA, which is hardly a pro-Israel group that looks at the issue of nuclear non-proliferation. The outlet itself, the IAEA, had assessed that Iran had ratcheted up enrichment and found that they'd already enriched 400 kilograms of uranium. Now you're talking about more than just one or two nuclear bombs, and you already have those ballistic missiles. So you can't wait any longer. So I think back to your point, if not within hours, certainly days, weeks, or a year, that all simply evaporates. And the fact is, right now, Iran is so vulnerable, that's the time to bring in these airstrikes and see what you can do to blow up the nuclear capabilities.
And it's amazing. You look at the intelligence, one of the most incredible intelligence operation that led to something significant was when Israel, the pagers.
The pagers.
I mean, it's just unbelievable, right? And in this case, they tricked all the key people, the generals, the nuclear scientists, to get into the same place before the attack so they could take those people out. I mean, the intelligence is incredible, and which allows them to be more pinpoint, and not just, well, gosh, somebody's in this whole area. Let's just take everybody out. So, a lot of times we don't know, because we're not having to do this kind of thing. We don't know the level of our intelligence. I mean, recently in the last 8 years, it seems like it's been more used against trying to stop Trump. But I bet it's not at the level of Israel's intelligence, and it should be. That's really what the purpose of having intelligence operation is.
I did hear that one of the people that was read into all of that intelligence is the current ambassador from the United States to Israel. And, of course, we all know Mike Huckabee. Yeah. And in some respects, he actually had a time in which he was even calling for prayer for the peace of Jerusalem. And you guys know him, and I feel pretty good about him being in that position as well.
Definitely. I think that shows that they feel they can trust. If you remember, under the last administration, things were leaked, and that Israel provided to the United States, which was damaging. And so, they just stopped sharing things. So, very different relationship right now with the United States and Israel.
Well, again, pray for Benjamin Netanyahu. Pray for, of course, our ambassador, Mike Huckabee. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And there's a lot more we can talk about, but I think I do want to move on, because all week we've been talking about these riots and these protests. And tomorrow will be No Kings rallies all over the country in an attempt to sort of counter-program to the 250th anniversary of the United States Army. So I think we can certainly talk about some of that as well. As we go to the website, let me mention the first two articles are from First Liberty, so you can click on that or even follow the link to First Liberty and sign up for their insider report. The third one is the Israeli attack on Iranian nuclear sites, and when we come back, we'll get into some others. There's also a banner that says Anchored to Truth, and if you click on that button, Give Now, we have it already a $50,000 matching challenge on the table, and maybe a little bit later we'll talk about the need to support these ministries, because as we all get to the end of our fiscal year, that's an important time. So if you've been waiting to give, we got a match on the table already. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again in studio with us today, Kelly Shackelford, Jeff Mateer. Let's, if we can, talk about the fact that there have been, as we've been talking about for some time, protests in not just Los Angeles, but other places. But I'll focus on that for just a minute, because some people have said, okay, why is it that indeed ICE is involved in picking up different individuals? Why spend time in California? And it gets back to somebody asking Willie Sutton why he actually robbed banks. And he said, well, that's where the money is. And it turns out that if you go back and look at the numbers, 40% of all the illegal aliens in the country are in one state, California.
Wow.
So that's why there's been that focus. The other is the fact that, are you going to allow sanctuary cities to decide that they're not going to follow federal immigration law? And you are two lawyers. Remember a time when Arizona said, well, we'll do immigration on our own. And Barack Obama and the Supreme Court said, no, you have to follow the federal government. So it cuts both ways, doesn't it?
It does. The federal government is the one who has control in the Constitution over immigration, which is as it should be, right? I mean, it's the country, people coming into the country. Look, if they don't want to help, you can't force them to help, I don't think, legally. I think that's incredibly, I don't know, I was going to say foolish, but I just need to say stupid. Mm-hmm. It's really harmful to your own citizens if there are people who could be hardened criminals coming in illegally from other countries, and you don't want to help. So you release these people. Let's say they did something in your state, and you'd release them to victimize your own citizens because you're not trying to help. I mean, it's just crazy from a public policy standpoint. But I think from a legal standpoint, you can't force them to. However, if the state or these local officials or whoever interferes with federal officials who are doing their job under federal criminal laws and other, now those people are engaging in criminal, they're aiding and abetting, they're interfering with a federal officer trying to perform their duties. So I think while they don't have to help, although that's nuts, if they interfere and they try to cause trouble, that is a whole different story. And I think they're going to be federally prosecuted. I think we're going to see examples of this starting to happen around the country.
Yeah, I'd wonder, the liberals who are criticizing this, if you think of people like Governor Newsom, would he, if he were in the 1960s, he would have opposed President Kennedy sending in federal troops to protect students in order to get into schools that were being desegregated. I guess he would oppose that because the federal government can't enforce the law with regard to those issues. No, I agree 100%. I mean, I agree with Kelly as well. I don't think that the president can direct the state resources, the state officials, the state. But when they fail to act, then he has every right to do that. And if I were a citizen of California, I would want him to do that. I think I've before I went to California. This is before COVID, and was in downtown LA, and I was just shocked. I mean, it's awful. I mean, it was awful. Just the number of homeless people, and just I mean, people urinating in public and doing other things. Just there, broad daylight. This wasn't at night. This is just during the day. So I can't imagine how unsafe the streets of Los Angeles are, how much it's impacting business in Los Angeles. I wouldn't be a homeowner or any of just everything that's associated with that. So I think what the president is doing is 100% correct. And I think you're seeing that the public, not the public at large,
yep,
overwhelmingly supports it. Mm-hmm. Overwhelmingly supports it.
And I think it's some ways it's a repeat of almost the last, I don't know, 4 years or so, or 5 years, 6 years. They're kind of trying something that didn't work before, and that especially now the American people are onto. This idea of going in the camera and lying when the American people can see the video.
Yes. Mostly peaceful.
Yeah. So the mayor says mostly peaceful. No, she actually says peaceful. And at the same time, she's issuing a curfew. It's like, I mean, anybody knows that she's lying when she does that. The governor saying we don't need any help, when the police chief specifically says he is overwhelmed. The American people know, they've seen this lie sort of program before. They have it took them a while, but that's part of what happened in the election. They've had enough of that. They were told that there was no inflation, that there was no real problem with their finances. They all knew it was a lie, and they kept telling them that everything's great. You're great. Everything's good. And the same thing. And they remember the Floyd protests and riots and damage to property and setting cars on fire and everything that happened. And so when they start trotting out the lies here, they're like, okay, I've had enough of that. So the political strategy of this is really, really bad. I don't know. I don't know if this is true, but I think it might be true. The Democratic Party is really getting smaller because they're losing the young people. That they're supportive of Trump more than any category. Mm-hmm. They're losing constituencies, and as they get smaller, it's more radical, and so they're pushing this stuff. So they're like almost digging a deeper and deeper hole for themselves, because it's now becoming really branded that a part of the Democratic Party is violence and protest, because they're not coming out and saying, stop the violence. They're not coming out and saying, thank you, even though I totally disagree with you on a lot of things, President Trump, thank you for stopping the violence. Mm-hmm. And so they can't get to any other issues that they would like to talk about, because they won't do what is obvious, because they're so radical and so sort of anti-Trump that they won't take the reasonable position, and they're branding themselves more and more and more into a long-term hole, I think, politically.
Jeff, sometimes the exception proves the rule. You're going to be in Pennsylvania in about a week, and Senator Fetterman is the one outstanding Democrat, and I read some of the things he said.
And who would have thought you would have said that 2 years ago?
But he's, as far as I can tell, the only Democrat that's put out a press release and has condemned everything that has happened and made the case that all that you're doing is causing people to have even less sympathy for your cause. And that comes from a senator that most people thought was having some mental issues. Of course, now they're using character assassination to say so, but he's the exception that I think proves the rule that Kelly's talking about, isn't he?
I mean, it's hard to say. He's the voice of reason of the Democratic Party right now. And again, who would have said that 2 years ago? But he is the voice of reason. And where, I mean, and which just tells you, to Kelly's point, I mean, where are not conservative Democrats, which we used to have, the Sam Nunns of the world, right? Uh-huh. And the Joe Liebermans. I mean, those people are long gone from the party.
Not around.
But where are the moderates in the Democrat Party? Because, again, to the point you guys mentioned, we just look at the videos and see what's going on. I mean, you see just somebody driving their car and then just getting, they're just pounding it like crazy, and then and I'm not, in a different scenario, I might want to go after the Waymo cars too, because, but not in this scenario, the driverless cars. I know when we were in Arizona and you pull up next to one, and then you keep thinking. And then I did look at I was in Arizona, of course, for spring training. Yeah. And I looked at my father-in-law and said, should I see what it does if I pull really in front of it? And he's like, no, I don't think you should do that. But yeah, they're beating, but they're destroying property, and that's just crazy. I loved, and I know we've got to go to a break in a second, but I love Ann Coulter when she says, and perhaps the dumbest sentence ever to appear in the Times, which is saying something. Yeah. That Trump is focusing particularly on examples of protesters lashing out at federal agents. even as many remain peaceful. I mean, it's just like.
And then she goes on to say FDR focused particularly on Pearl Harbor, even as many other harbors remain peaceful. Just a great line.
Wonderful.
Okay, well, we've talked about one senator. When we come back, I want to talk about two. One of those is Senator Alex Padilla, and the other one is Josh Hawley, Senator Josh Hawley, because these two senators, I think, illustrate two different ways to look at this, and I'd love to get your thoughts about that. And, of course, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Might also mention a piece that I didn't post, but it's very good, by Michael Barone. These riots may encourage illegal immigrants to self-deport. We're starting to see more and more saying, I'd rather not wonder if I'm going to be caught someday. Maybe it's time to return to my country of origin. So we'll see if self-deporting takes place as well. But we have a lot more to cover, and we'll do that right after this.
It's Pride Month again. It used to be called Gay Pride. Now, in an effort to force the concept on all of us, it's just Pride. There are Pride celebrations taking place across the country. The mayor of Washington, D.C. proclaims her city the gayest in the world. D.C. has been hosting Pride events for 50 years. And this year, D.C. is host of World Pride, an honor in international LGBTQ circles. But most cities where Pride celebrations are a big deal have been forced to pare back the festivities due to budget shortfalls. Tony Perkins, president of Family Research Council, says major corporations have been quietly backing away from the signature events of Pride Month. AP reports that San Francisco Pride, well known for its LGBTQ celebrations, is facing a $200,000 budget gap after corporate donors dropped out. Which donors? AP points to Comcast, Anheuser-Busch, beverage giant Diageo, and two other major corporate sponsors left unnamed. The Pride group in Kansas City also lost $200K, half their annual budget. NYC Pride is fundraising to narrow a $750,000 budget gap after companies withdrew. A spokesperson says approximately 20% of their corporate sponsors pulled some or all of their support, including PepsiCo and Nissan. AP cites research which shows that a growing number of American consumers don't want companies to take positions on hot-button issues. Barbara Kahn, a marketing professor at the Wharton School of Business, told the news outlet, "There have always been people who said, I don't want my toothpaste to have an opinion, I just want to use my toothpaste." But the tide has shifted, and research shows there are more people that feel that way now. Family Research Council and other Christian organizations have spent years educating the public regarding Pride Month and exposing the companies donating to it. Tony Perkins credits prayer and activism and says that cultural change happened because people stood firm. Let's keep pressure on. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Well, we're talking about the riots and the protest. On Thursday, there was a meeting that was held in Los Angeles, and that involved the Secretary of Homeland Security. This is Kristi Noem. It's a press briefing, and it's one of those kinds of things. I think all of us around the table have been at those, done some of those and the rest. But there's an individual that sort of rushes the podium. Not knowing who it is, they try to restrain him, and it turns out it's Senator Alex Padilla, who is, of course, a senator from the state of California. Not dressed in a suit or anything, not wearing a pin that would show that he was U.S. Senator. And, of course, the article I posted here I thought would be good because it was where the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, looking at the video, saying, well, look at the video. At the same time, people shouting him down because there were people marching to his office, Speaker Mike Johnson, and Senator as well, John Thunes, and he was trying to express the idea that if you see what was happening, they didn't know who he was, and even when you know who he was, he made a really strong point about the fact that, again, people can draw their own conclusions, but they saw a senator wildly inappropriate, and a sitting member of Congress shouldn't act that way. I think what the speaker said made some sense.
It was right on. I mean, again, I think this playbook that they're trying is so old, and I think the American people are way beyond it now. So everybody knows that he did this as some sort of theatrical thing. Everybody knows that a cabinet official has major security around them for good reason. And everybody knows that if it was you, if you're listening to what I'm saying right now, and you tried to rush through the security to get to a cabinet official, that they would stop you. And that when they told you to stop at the beginning and you don't, and you still are yelling and you're trying to break through security, that they're going to take you out of the room and handcuff you. I mean, I'm just surprised it wasn't worse. So that is, I think most Americans realize it. And they also realize that, if he wanted a meeting with Kristi Noem, all he had to do was ask. I mean, senators get meetings with the cabinet officials all the time. And of course, she did after this.
They met later.
She had the meeting, she listened, but that wasn't his purpose. And so immediately as he does this, you have elected officials in Congress and the Senate using the same verbiage to attack the president. And so it's just obvious that they thought this was some sort of great move or great plan. And instead, it's, again, the American people don't want this. And I thought the speaker said it just right. I mean, your job as a senator, as a congressman, is not to try to create, these kinds of problems. It's to tone down, to allow people to speak, to one another in a peaceful way. And it's a really bad example. We've got another situation with congressmen that did this at a facility where they tried to push through law enforcement. I mean, there literally might be criminal charges brought against that congresswoman. This is some sort of Marxist tactic that they thought would work, that at first it might have worked, maybe back George Floyd times or whatever, but it's not. It doesn't work anymore. It's not genuine. I think the American people want genuineness. This is fake. This is theater. And if you really want to solve these problems, you could simply talk to Kristi Noem. They might disagree with each other. They might have 10% they agree on. That's the way we do things in America. I would doubt that they will take action in the Senate against the senator. I think they, in normal cases, they would, because I don't think you want elected officials essentially attacking cabinet members and trying to bust through their security. It's really a bad thing to do. It could have led to a much worse situation, and it certainly needs to be discouraged.
Yeah, and I think actually, I agree with you. They probably won't do something, but I think they absolutely should. I mean, this lack of civility. I mean, what kind of message are we sending that you disagree with someone, and so you're going to stage this? And and even beyond this, just in normal, anytime that you have someone having an event, you have someone speaking, and it's okay to rush the stage. What would happen to those people?
Yeah.
And I think you had a scenario, Kerby.
Well, I went to your dinner, and you had about 1,000 people there, and you had of course, Kelly's up there speaking. You have the individuals that were part of the SEALs team, and I just can't even imagine if someone rushed the stage, whether or not one of your individuals, I know which one it might have been, would actually take somebody out. And so I just can't even imagine.
It might have been General Boykin may have taken somebody out. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, he might have been the one. But nevertheless, that I think is just a great illustration about why when we think of the United States Senate as the greatest deliberative body in the world, a place where some of the greatest oratory has taken place, some of the most impassioned speeches, and then you have an individual engaged in political theater right there in Los Angeles at a press conference. It's so unbecoming to the stature that we've always placed U.S. senators in.
And also think of, okay, if this is not roundly rebuked, then other people, regular citizens, will think that this is a great tactic. They will go and do it at their deal. And somewhere somebody's going to get shot. Yeah. You try to bust through security and go after a cabinet official, I mean, somebody's going to get hurt. Maybe a number of citizens will get hurt. This is a really bad thing to do. And if anybody, certainly senators, but I mean, senators or congressmen should know much better than this. And I think it's sad. And again, that's over in the top of the fact that what he was doing this over is something that the American people are totally against. Yeah. They had an election where this being the number one issue, they even to this day, the polling shows they want these illegal people who came here illegally deported. So it's like foolishness on top of foolishness, bad PR on top of bad PR. So it really, I grew up watching Democrats. I always thought they were much smarter politically than the Republicans.
Usually you have been.
They seem to really outmaneuver them for much and much of the time. And gosh, the last few years, I don't know. I mean, it's just like they've just completely lost rational thinking on good political strategy. You'll see some stuff even recently from Padilla and some of the other people that are Democrats that are saying, stop this. This is really not a good idea. But it's a really small voice at this point. And again, I think this is really damaging to their own efforts.
I'd love to know the focus group that came up with that, because you had 3 governors before the Congress all said, come and arrest me, and it's like all 3 of them, including Senator Alex Padilla, wanted to get their mugshot so that they could have a mugshot like Trump did or something like that. Where did that think that was going to work?
And I think it goes back to they're playing. I mean, the Democratic Party, as Kelly said, is shrinking. And what's left is just this hard left radical element. And so they're playing to that element, which is not going to play to the center. It's not, I mean, certainly not going to play to the right, but it's not going to play to middle America.
Yeah. Well, we have a break that's coming up. And so let me just mention, when we come back, we have the other senator, and that's Senator Josh Hawley. And he is the chair of the Senate Subcommittee on Crime and Counterterrorism. And he'd like to know who's paying for some of this. And so we'll get into that. We'll talk a little bit more about the riots, and then we'll get into some other topics as well, because there is so much more to cover. Before we end the next hour, we'll also give you some prayer targets. We, of course, send out our Pray for America. And if you haven't signed up for that, you might want to get it, because the next one will obviously be on Israel and Iran. But we certainly encourage you to pray for some of these religious liberty issues and some Supreme Court decisions coming down, and some others that the Supreme Court needs to take. We'll be right back.
In 1972, Point of View was founded to address 3 needs in America. First, to create a trustworthy source of information without the liberal bias pervasive in the mainstream media. Second, to cover issues that real Americans needed to know about, issues impacting faith, family, and freedom. Finally, and most importantly, Point of View was founded to examine each issue from a Christian perspective, anchoring Americans to biblical truth once more. Thanks to support from people like you, Point of View has successfully carried out this mission for 53 years. But if we want to carry the mission forward into the future, we need your help today. This is a critical time of year. Point of View depends on listeners like you to donate generously. forge ahead into the future with us. Give today at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just wanted to tell you, too, how much I have appreciated Point of View over the years. I've always been taught that we take care of our own, and I feel like Point of View is one of our own because of the Christian worldview that you do promote. And so I have become a partner today, and I just want to thank you so much, and just God bless you for all that you do.
Listen, I wanted to make a quick comment. I'm a relatively new listener to the show, and I really kind of stumbled upon it more than anything because I'm doing some driving now that I wasn't in the past. And my comment really is, I think you guys and gals are more right on about the assessment of this country right now than anything I've heard. You know, I go home and I tell my wife, you've got to hear what they're talking about on the show. It's just so right on. And I tell my parents the same thing.
I'm 25 years old, and I started listening to Point of View about 4 years ago, and it has changed the way that I think and the way that I view the world around me.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today is our weekend edition, and Kelly Shackelford, Jeff Mateer in studio. And I thought I'd just, as we get into this issue of who's not only funding the riots, but tomorrow is going to be the protest, if you will, against Donald Trump and against the military and a variety of other things by having the No Kings rallies all over the country. And it leads me to a couple of examples of misinformation or disinformation. Governor Newsom the other day claimed that the reason we are having this military function tomorrow is because President Trump was forcing the military to put on a vulgar display to celebrate his birthday, just as other failed dictators have done in the past. Now, I don't even know where you start with that, but first of all, let's give the historical perspective. Tomorrow is Flag Day. Tomorrow also is the 250th anniversary of the United States Army. If you want to look it up, June 14th, 1775, the Continental Congress voted to create the Continental Army. So that's the reason for that. But it's like some of the other statements, for example, that I showed up at a grade school graduation party, even though that video was seen millions of times, that turned out to be false. The argument that they were actually raiding people at a Home Depot while another group was at Home Depot was not true as well, because I just had seen some ICE officials across the street, had nothing to do with it. So, Kelly, as we've talked about before, whether it was the pandemic or the lockdown, there's just a lot of misinformation and disinformation, and some of it comes from the governor of the state of California.
Yeah, there's a obviously we've heard it a lot, but Trump derangement syndrome. It's just there's so much hatred that you just get some crazy stuff that goes on. I mean, I think look, we don't have a lot of, sort of pomp and circumstance. We don't have a lot, and we see that in other countries around the world, but we've never really done as much of that. But you know what? Trump kind of is that way. He's kind of a showman. And so it's not surprising at all that he would want the Army in the 250th anniversary to do something. This dictator whatevership is just, again, it's not a great way to win support because it's so foolish. I think Trump responded yesterday when they asked him about it, and he said, "Well, I sure don't feel like a dictator." He said, "I had to get everything through Congress." he said, "These guys are really difficult." So I mean, come on. Again, I think one of the undertones, the reason why a lot of these young people have moved towards Trump, is the whole issue of genuineness. Mm-hmm. Trump has got plenty of problems, but I don't think anybody says he's not. I mean, he's just kind of all out there for everybody to see, and so these little kind of sleight of hand things that are obvious are not helpful. And so I don't think, saying, no king. I mean, nobody thinks that he's the king. So, I think they'd have been better to focus on an issue or right. Something that mm-hmm. people might really, but to say things that are clearly not true and then use that as the reason to protest that thing that's really not true, that really doesn't work, and I think it backfires on you. So I think this is a weird attack and I think they'd be much better focusing on issues where maybe you would be a split amongst Americans.
Yeah, I wonder what's going to happen when we start the 1776 celebrations.
Oh, yeah. Don't you know?
Because they'll be going crazy then. But we're actually going to have some patriotism. We're actually going to promote that we love this country. So, if people want to go out and protest America, then I guess they have the right to protest America as long as they really do it peacefully.
Again, one of the questions that people have had is these riots, which have developed in Los Angeles and Seattle and all sorts of places. I've got in front of me here the map of all the places the No Kings protests are going to take place tomorrow. And there's a very legitimate question. Who's funding all of this? Some of it is perhaps spontaneous, but you've heard the phrase before, Kelly, of AstroTurf. It isn't natural. And indeed, that's one of the reasons why Senator Josh Hawley, chair of the Senate Subcommittee on Crime and Counterterrorism, says, we're going to try to figure out where this is coming from.
I think people realized last time when the riots were starting to break out around the country that the funding was coming from sources where we've heard the same thing about what's been happening recently, the LA situation that then spread. And again, maybe 90% of the people there are there to protest peacefully. But if you pay people to use those to engage and start throwing bricks at officers and cinder blocks and all these things they've been doing and lighting cars on fire, that's where the issue is. And so I think it's a great thing. It's exactly what the FBI is in existence for, to find out those kinds of things and to go after the people that are funding and pushing this. And that's what I wonder. I know you got the Walton, Christy Walton, the one funding a lot of this, No Kings rally. Can those be peaceful around the country? I don't know. I think it's highly likely that somewhere, if not in a number of these, there will be, setting things on fire. And I'm not saying most of the people, but it doesn't take most of the people to make these things violent. And if so, it's going to be associated with her. So I just think that these are it's very difficult. I think it would be a great thing for everybody, even people who do want to do a lot of protest, for them to find out who the people are and what the organizations. Now, one of the bad answers that we've already gotten to this is that some of the people behind all this were funded by us.
That's right.
By taxpayers.
We talked about that earlier in the week.
And so that,
some of those organizations,
we should not be funding
NGOs
with taxpayer money any groups that are engaging in protests from any side of any issue. That's up to private individuals to fund, not taking taxpayer money to fund people's opposition or support for particular issues. So this is part of what needs to be cleaned up with a lot of the money that's going out.
Well, again, I just thought I'd put that on the table. It's one of our articles. When we come back, since I have two lawyers here, I want to get some perspective on some of these legal issues. First of all, Gavin Newsom filed a lawsuit against the administration. I got a sense that they're going to not think that's going to go very far. But then we've had a couple of these very important decisions coming down, and a lot of them are 9-0. And I wanted to get some perspective on that because these two individuals have been watching that. And again, as we've encouraged you to find out a little bit more about First Liberty Institute, we have a link to their website, and you can click on that, scroll to the bottom, and you'll find a section there which gives you a chance to get their First Liberty Insider and know a little bit more about some of that. We've posted a couple of these articles for you, and so I would encourage you when we come back to maybe listen in to what's happening kind of behind the scenes on some of these very important issues related to the Supreme Court. So we'll come back and talk about those right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Many of the concerns about the impact of artificial intelligence focus on AI and should instead focus on the human being using it. That is why Christian Schneider warns about the danger of outsourcing our brains. Apparently, many are lazy and quite willing to let AI manage their lives. He says the social media market is now saturated with artificial intelligence-powered social media managers that will take care of the drudgery of posting content, liking other people's photos, and commenting on their post. You can fully automate your online experience and not even have to generate the typical replies of LOL or appropriate emojis. Dating websites are rolling out AI wingmen that write dating profiles for people and contact others. Of course, we have also heard about customized chatbots that can fill the relationship void and the loneliness epidemic. AI makes cheating on college campus even easier. One survey of 1,000 college students discovered that 90% of them had used ChatGPT to help them with their homework. I've even seen one complaint from a student that not only were her fellow students using AI to write papers, but her professors were also using AI to grade those papers and offer comments. Whenever we talked about AI in the past, we feared Skynet and Terminators with glowing eyes. But the real problem is that we decided to stop thinking and creating. We decided to let the machines do the work for us. I'm quite willing to let a machine do hard, dangerous work for me, but I'm not willing to stop thinking and creating so a machine can do it for me. We should be using the gifts God has given us rather than expecting a machine to do our thinking and creating for us. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on biblical reliability, go to viewpoints.info/biblical reliability. Viewpoints.info/biblical reliability. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again this weekend for a few minutes at least talk about some of these cases. And one of those was the California governor, Gavin Newsom. The administration filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration. Now, all of a sudden you hear a name you haven't heard in a while, and that is Judge Charles Breyer. And if that name sounds familiar, he's the younger brother of the retired liberal Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer. And we'll see how that plays out. But Kelly, if nothing else, there was a lot of argument that really Gavin Newsom has no standing because we have from the Supreme Court always ruled that individuals that are dealing with immigration, the president is the one that deals with that. And also, even if the governor does not request an individual to bring in the National Guard, there is no precedent that would say that they could not bring them in, even if the governor did not request that, because we have some examples from 1960, 1965, for example. So no one thought this case would go very far, but maybe it will. What's going on?
It's not going to go very far at the Court of Appeals, even though it's the Ninth Circuit. But the panel at the Ninth Circuit makeup, I think, is not going to be very favorable to Newsom. And look, I mean, I think most people understand this. If federal buildings and federal agencies are in danger, the federal government has a right to provide protection for those things.
Makes sense.
And those people. That's kind of basic. And so this whole Newsom approach that there are no problems, that we don't need any help, while the police chief is saying we're overwhelmed, and all these other things are happening. They're evidently it's peaceful, but they're putting a curfew out at the same time. This is not going to work. Again, it's more the theater that is not going to go very far. And certainly the president has a right to protect federal buildings, federal agencies, federal officials who are under attack.
Yeah, and he has a right to enforce federal law. It's kind of interesting because the Democrats are saying Newsom's being critical of President Trump, but it wasn't too long ago when you had a conservative governor like Governor Abbott who's trying to also protect his state and taking action and say, oh, no, immigration is a federal issue. Yeah. Only the president can act. You can't. And so, as usual, Democrats are talking out of both sides of their mouths. But at the end of the day, the president does have the authority to enforce our laws. He, as Kelly said, he has the authority to protect federal assets. And so I can't imagine if this goes to the Supreme Court. Hopefully it doesn't even have to go to the Supreme Court.
No, I can't imagine it would.
But I can't imagine if it didn't, that this should be one that's unanimous at the Supreme Court. But, that may be asking too much of Sotomayor and Jackson.
It's going to go moot anyway, right? I mean, this is not going to – I don't think this is going to last too long. This is the whole point. Once you provide law and order, it kind of goes away. It's only when you let it kind of grow into this sort of violent mobs thing around the country that you have it grow and grow and grow. If you make sure you stop it immediately, it tends to stop. So I have a feeling before we know it, this thing will be over, and therefore the lawsuit will be mooted as to what can be done. But I think in the short term, they're going to have a hard time winning in this situation.
Well, since we're talking about the Supreme Court, earlier in the week we did get into the fact that one of these cases has to do with Catholic charities, and it was a 9-0 opinion actually written by Sonia Sotomayor, and the argument, which if I understand it carefully, is that there were judges, four at least, judges that were in Wisconsin that argued that because Catholic Charities was doing non-Catholic work like feeding the homeless and reaching out to the poor.
That's not religious, Kerby. Come on.
That somehow was a secular action. And I thought I'd like to get your comments because you've been defending a couple of individuals who have had criminal charges and other charges because they have been doing what we've always thought churches and pastors are supposed to do. So I'd like to get your thoughts about that.
Well, have they read the New Testament? What did Jesus do? And that's what his followers do, the things that Jesus did, to feed people, to take care of people. To do things in public, and it was a crazy case. It just tells you how crazy the state court in Wisconsin.
I know,
and unfortunately, there's very high profile. I think we talked about it here. A very high profile race at the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and the Democrat won. Well, this is what you get who think that churches should only be doing activities inside their church that are like religious, because we do know, like our Dad's Place case, even when you start opening your doors to take people off the streets to get out of the cold, cities don't like, the liberals don't like that. So it was great to see even the liberal justices agreeing that this is crazy.
Yeah, it's I think the arrogance of the Wisconsin judges is a little shocking.
Yes.
I mean, what they essentially said to Catholic Charities, who's been around for a long time, and look, there are people that are a little more conservative in their religion that have criticized Catholic Charities for being kind of a little too weak on the religion side. But essentially what these judges said was, you're just not religious enough. I mean, it's like, excuse me? I don't think you have the authority to make that kind of a decision in this country. And the Supreme Court, that's why they whacked them 9-0. I do think, though, that also something else is going on there. That day that those decisions were, there was another one on gun rights.
I wanted you to bring that up.
There were 3 different decisions that came down, all unanimous, all written by one of the more liberal judges. One by Kagan, one by Sotomayor, one by Jackson. And And so I think there was a message going on there, because it's really rare to have in the substantive issues. It's not rare in sort of procedural issues to have the justices lining up together, but on these type of things, like things involving religion or gun rights, it's not as normal. At least they're going to write some dissent on some issue or
concurring decision.
Yeah, something different.
Yeah.
So I really feel like the fact of releasing those all at the same time, they're just sort of trying to send a message of the cohesiveness of the court, and I think that doesn't seem like an accident to me. I mean, I can't ever remember any time when you've had, let's say in this case, you got 3 liberal justices where you issue decisions that are unanimous and all 3 are liberal justices.
I think it's very interesting.
It's there's something, they're definitely, I mean, the court knows it's in a tough place right now because
I think so.
Under the last administration, there was this attempt to court pack, and which would be really, more than really damaging. It would destroy the courts. And now you've got Trump saying, these judges should be impeached, these sort of rogue district court judges. And you had Speaker Johnson say, which is technically true, hey, if they don't get this under control, if we need to, we can abolish every court except for the Supreme Court. They can. And his point was, we can regulate what's going on if you don't get control of these nationwide injunctions and all this stuff. So the court's in a real kind of difficult time, and they're trying to weather that. And I think this is part of them sending somewhat of a signal that we're together and trying to use it in that way.
I think this is John Roberts.
Yes,
I mean, I think the Chief Justice, I think this is, he is, throughout his career, certainly as a Supreme Court justice, has been concerned about the integrity of the court, the structure of the court, preserving the authority of the court. And he's had some rocky times the last few years. And so this is an attempt. I think he's working really, really hard. I think he does it in selecting cases too. I think in the way they're looking at taking cases, they want to take cases that they can get 9-0 on.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's because there are other ways you could have handled these cases, but they want to they want to do that.
Well, you think of so many cases you've had that are 5-4, 6-3, and all of a sudden we're getting all these 9-0s.
Well,
haven't seen those in a while.
And then even think about the 4-4.
I want to get to that after the break because that was the next one I was going to bring up. Let me just do the promo for it because it could have been 5-4, but in one particular case, I think it was Amy Coney Barrett had to recuse herself. But that relates very much to your cases because a lot of that has to do with charter schools, school choice, and the rest. So I wanted to leave that for the next segment. And before we're done, we also going to talk about Pride Month because Penna Dexter's written about this, and we also have an article about that. But if you've been following this whole issue of school choice and even some of the cases that First Liberty has had, you can think of the one in Montana, of course, yours in Maine, and also some other ones. This one coming out of Oklahoma. We'll get into that issue, but we need to take a break. So we'll talk about that right after this.
The Bible tells us not to worry. And yet, there is a lot of worrying stuff in our world today. Thankfully, the Bible doesn't stop at telling us not to worry. God gives us a next step. He says we need to pray. But sometimes, even knowing what to pray can be difficult. And that is why Point of View has relaunched our Pray for America movement, a series of weekly emails to guide you in prayer for our nation. Each week, you'll receive a brief update about a current issue affecting Americans, along with a written prayer that you can easily share with others. We'll also include a short free resource for you in each email so you can learn more about the issue at hand. Will you commit to pray for America? Go to pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner at the top of the page to subscribe. Again, that's pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in America. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
You know, one of the hottest topics right now in a lot of state legislatures is school choice. And of course, that is an issue that we've been talking about for some time. And one of the cases that we talked about last week, since we had Erin Smith in studio, and she's from Oklahoma, gave us a little bit of the background on this St. Isidore of Seville Catholic school. And the argument is that even though it's a religious charter schools should receive, whether they're religious or not, the same kind of financial benefit. And it ended up with a 4-4 deadlock, and the reason for that is Justice Amy Coney Barrett recused herself. So, Kelly, this looks like a case in which maybe they just kicked the can down the road, but eventually I think something will come back, and there will be an opportunity to establish that just because, if I can quote Brett Kavanaugh for just a minute, religious institutions shouldn't be treated as second-class citizens, right?
Yeah, it's what we were just talking about. That decision was really bizarre. If people don't understand, there's obviously 9 justices. To have one of them recuse themselves is, you don't see that a lot. And from everything we know, Justice Barrett should not have recused herself. It appears that because she was a law professor at Notre Dame, which was part of this lawsuit, and because she was close friends with one of the professors there who was a part of the lawsuit, that must be why that's everybody's guess. But that's not enough. People practice in little communities. They know each other. They're friends. Mm-hmm. It's okay. You can still do that. Now, if Notre Dame, if she had an investment in Notre Dame and was making money now, that's a different story. But That's not what was going on. So that was weird. But then, when you've got 8 justices, and supposedly you've got 5 conservatives and three on the liberal side, and they have already ruled in our case, the Carson case, that look, whenever you have a program that provides government benefits to schooling, you cannot discriminate because it's religious. You treat everybody the same. That's what this case was about. Well, all of a sudden you get this ruling that is what's called per curiam, which means nobody really puts their name to it.
Right. That was interesting.
So all of a sudden we're told it was a 4-4 tie, but we're not being told who was what. Now we can kind of figure that out, but that was really odd. And there's no decision. Right?
Yes.
There's no analysis because nobody really wins, and it goes back, which is a loss for St. Isidore School. But it just kind of, and so again, you're talking about Chief Justice Roberts trying to stay out of the controversy. Mm-hmm. And so this is another way of kicking this can down the road, keeping the controversial case out. He'll go forward with the 9 zeros and let the liberal justices write it. But in this case, it was, I think we'll just avoid this one for now. But I do think in the future, the religious charter school is going to win. But it's going to be a later day.
Yeah, stay tuned. We may be working on something about that. But I think I know we've got listeners in Oklahoma. And you think generally like Oklahoma, I don't know what the numbers are. It's got to be one of the most conservative states voting for President Trump. It is a horrible state Supreme Court, just an absolutely horrible state Supreme Court. And that's because, the reason that the school now, although it was a tie at the Supreme Court, it upholds the Oklahoma Supreme Court decision, which ruled against the school. And so Oklahoma needs to fix their state courts.
It's because of how they pick them.
Yes.
There's a number of states that instead of letting the people pick their judges, what they do is they say, we're going to let the Bar Association tell the governor, here are your 3 choices. Pick which one you think is best. Well, the Bar Association is a really bad place to go. Which is why, for instance, Pam Bondi just said, no more American Bar Association because they're so politicized and so left-wing that we're not allowing them, we're not including them in our process. Well, this is how Oklahoma, a conservative state, is allowing their judges to be picked, which is just crazy. They really do need to change that.
Again, you said we have listeners in Oklahoma. We have listeners in Maine. Let's remind all of our listeners for just a minute, because you mentioned this Carson versus Macon, and that is where the Supreme Court ruled in your favor and said that this would be an really a violation of the Free Exercise Clause. And then as soon as that came down, Kelly, you've got to update this, because that seemed to have decided the case. And then the people that are part of the Maine legislature, in their inscrutable wisdom, came up with another way to avoid actually doing what the Supreme Court told them to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of tweets by the Attorney General and others talking about how horrible the Supreme Court is, and then they immediately go into the legislature and say, "Oh, okay, well, we can't tell parents that they can't pick any religious schools, so we'll just change the law to where we make it illegal for them to pick certain religious schools." People with these kinds of beliefs, and they literally read the doctrinal statement of our client.
Yes.
Okay? I mean, it's as clear a target, but I think it's a beautiful opportunity because the Supreme Court has already ruled. We've already had the district court. We're now at the Court of Appeals waiting for the opinion. I think it's a great case to go back to the Supreme Court, because we've always known that the issue in private religious schools participating in school choice programs was whether the state had the ability to come in and tell them that they can't follow their religious beliefs. You can have the money as long as you don't follow these religious beliefs. If we win this case, we get it back up, first it's going to look like, which it is, that they're pulling shenanigans to try to get around what the court has already ruled.
Right.
But it also is an opportunity to decide a huge issue that would really free up and protect all Christian or religious schools in the country.
Yeah, that case, we're waiting for a decision, was argued back in early January, the first week of January at the First Circuit, which is in Boston. And we're waiting. We've been waiting since. And so, it's one of those. They sometimes take their time. That's a little long. Ninth Circuit's even worse with issuing their decisions. But we also have another charter school case in California.
Right, I was going to bring that one up.
Yeah,
and those are all prayer targets for people right now, right?
Absolutely, because we just had argument in that case. And so we're waiting to see what happens. But again, it's the same principle. It's taking our tremendous victory in Carson and now making the states actually follow what the Supreme Court says, even though they don't want to treat religion and non-religion equally. But that's what the Supreme Court says has to happen.
And I would encourage, you're talking about prayer targets.
Yeah, please.
People aren't going to know. I mean, they're not going to listen to point of view every day. They should, but they're going to be in their car. They're going to be somewhere else. So the only way for them to know to pray for these things is if they get the email we send out on Fridays that just summarizes the 4, 5, 6 biggest things every week on religious liberty. And it's also, so for instance, Monday, we are going to be at the first hearing of the Commission on Religious Liberty, the Presidential Commission. They're probably not going to know what happens there, but if they get the email, they'll get it. They'll probably get links to, if they want to listen to anything in the hearing, it'll be recorded. It'll all be available. So a way to you really have to stay involved or you won't know about these things. And so again, the easy way, you go to pointofview.net and the First Liberty website is up there. You click it to go on the website. And when you go on the First Liberty, which is firstliberty.org website, you just go down a little bit and you'll say be an insider. We have, I think, 600,000 to 700,000 people that said, I want that, and they get that. We don't share anybody's information. It doesn't cost anything, but it's a way for the body of Christ to get the information, to be in prayer, to realize maybe what's going on in their community that they didn't know about, and really to just be up to date and to be sort of the Paul Revere of their community for our freedoms.
So again, it's FLI Insider, and just click on that little button there. Some of you that are maybe have young people that you'd like to get involved, there's the F3, which stands for Future Faith Freedom, and we've talked about that before. So there's a couple of buttons that you can click on. But since we're coming to a break, one of the things we always like to do is play Penedexter pastor's commentary, and it's entitled Pride's Slowing Momentum, because Pride Month is, of course, Gay Pride Month, and we've been talking about that so far. But I also posted a piece by Matt Lamb. This one appears at another particular venue, and they're talking about the fact that there does seem to be a backing away. The argument that many people have made is, well, because Trump won, then Pride is losing its cultural ground. I think Matt Lamb has the better argument. Actually, Trump won because people have been backing away from this for some time on issues about men playing in women's sports, prescribing puberty blockers to gender-confused children and the rest. So we'll come back and talk about some of the changes in Pride Month. And I know this is not necessarily a Bud Light group or crowd, but that is a good illustration of how even in the corporate world things are changing. We'll be right back.
It's Pride Month again. It used to be called Gay Pride. Now, in an effort to force the concept on all of us, it's just Pride. There are Pride celebrations taking place across the country. The mayor of Washington, D.C. proclaims her city the gayest in the world. D.C. has been hosting Pride events for 50 years. And this year, D.C. is host of World Pride, an honor in international LGBTQ circles. But most cities where Pride celebrations are a big deal have been forced to pare back the festivities due to budget shortfalls. Tony Perkins, president of Family Research Council, says major corporations have been quietly backing away from the signature events of Pride Month. AP reports that San Francisco Pride, well known for its LGBTQ celebrations, is facing a $200,000 budget gap after corporate donors dropped out. Which donors? AP points to Comcast, Anheuser-Busch, beverage giant Diageo, and two other major corporate sponsors left unnamed. The Pride Group in Kansas City also lost $200K, half their annual budget. NYC Pride is fundraising to narrow a $750,000 budget gap after companies withdrew. A spokesperson says approximately 20% of their corporate sponsors pulled some or all of their support, including PepsiCo and Nissan. AP cites research which shows that a growing number of American consumers don't want companies to take positions on hot-button issues. Barbara Kahn, a marketing professor at the Wharton School of Business, told the news outlet, "There have always been people who said, 'I don't want my toothpaste to have an opinion, I just want to use my toothpaste.' But the tide has shifted, and research shows there are more people that feel that way now." Family Research Council and other Christian organizations have spent years educating the public regarding Pride Month and exposing the companies donating to it. Tony Perkins credits prayer and activism and says that cultural change happened because people stood firm. Let's keep pressure on. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention this before we wind down today. There was one other link I wanted to tell you about. RFIA.org stands for Restoring Faith in America. That's another link to some of the things that they're doing at First Liberty, and we hadn't mentioned that in a while, and I thought I would mention that because that is one of those action items where now that we have more religious freedom than we've ever had before, Kelly, you're encouraging people to walk through an open door.
It's amazing what is occurring through that effort, that RFIA.org. I mean, there are 10 Commandments going up all across Georgia, and the posters and there are. The state of Kentucky is bringing back a monument back to its lawn. There's state after state after state is beginning to pass laws on all this, and so people can be involved in things in their own state, but they probably don't know what's going on. That's why RFIA, and it's a great way. It's like citizens are always, what can I do? Well, there's real simple things you can do, and every month we send out to those people who are on that list. Here's this month what you can do, and so like when we get around towards Christmas, it's going to be, what you can put up a nativity scene on your county lawn, your city lawn, your whatever. That's all changed. For 50 years, people, we can't do that. Well, you can now because of all these recent victories. So it just lays out a lot of things that people can do in their own community.
Again, we have that link there as well. And, of course, Penedexter's commentary, Pride's Slowing Momentum. Also posted a piece by Matt Lamb. He actually writes for the AMAC newsletter, and that's one that he has posted and was pointing out, interestingly enough, that even when Joe Biden was in the White House and Democrats controlled both chambers of Congress, corporations were starting to back off anyway. And now we have, of course, she talks about it, and this article talks about the fact that San Francisco Pride, according to the Associated Press, is facing a $200,000 budget gap after a lot of the corporate sponsors are dropped out. Kansas City Pride in Kansas City lost about $200,000. And the most recent research, which looked at about 200 different corporate executives, found that almost 40%, 39% of the companies plan to reduce their engagement in Pride Month. And I think this illustrates again that it wasn't the election of Donald Trump. Some of this was happening already, but the election of Donald Trump was just a further illustration of the fact that when you start talking about same-sex marriage, when you start talking about men playing women's sports, as somebody put it the other day, I guess it was Robert Knight, the T is the anchor that's pulling down LGBT.
That's right.
And that's
exactly
really
right.
beginning to affect a lot of things, isn't it?
I really think it was a really bad strategic political move. Number one, the T is inconsistent. I mean, if there are no men and women and you can switch, then there is no lesbian. There is no, there is no homosexual man, because that was all based on there being actually two sexes. So it immediately puts you, and then it's so extreme that, people don't want children maimed with sex surgeries at, age 10 or 12 or all of this, and they don't want men and women sports, and it was such an extreme issue that it's really hurting their whole effort. And so I think there's been a turn there, a dramatic turn, and I think people need to know, if they'll remember, Trump was always pro LGB. Okay, it's the T that went too far, and he saw it as a political issue because there was an 80-20 kind of switch. And if you'll remember, the biggest ads at the campaign's end were those transgender issues, and so that Trump has really not been inconsistent on this. Christians have been uncomfortable with him for being pro-gay, but the T was where they really lost him and lost, I think, the country.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're a huge overreach on the part of that movement, and I think they would go back and like to dial it back somewhat. And I think you're getting that effect with regard to the Pride Month. A lot of cases, silliness, and of course, Kerby, my views about Pride Month and Major League Baseball, and it's not just Major League Baseball; it's just anybody where they they're demanding that you celebrate with us. And they dropped. It used to be right. It used to be Gay Pride Month. Well, it's not Gay Pride Month. It's now Pride Month because they want to encompass all of this, and that's too far. And so you have. I'm proud to say, as I sport my Texas Ranger.
I was going to say, you got Texas Rangers on today.
Just. I mean, we're not gonna. That's not. Let's just play baseball, and that's what Aaron Judge, who Gosh, I can't believe I'm going to applaud a New York Yankee, but he's exactly right on this. It's look, I just want to play baseball.
Right.
I don't want to wear things on my uniform and support causes. I just want to play baseball. Let's just play baseball. And I think the message should be for corporate America, it should be just do what you do, sell your product. You don't need to get involved in these type of activities.
Well, and again, corporate America has discovered that this doesn't work very well.
That's
of course,
right.
I mentioned Bud Light, but you can go through all the other ones here. Of course, this whole article goes into Dylan Mulvaney and all the rest of that, but then you can go to Target and a variety of others. And I think most of us just want to go to Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever it might be, grocery stores. And the first day of Pride Month, Kroger goes out with this big splash and everything. And my suggested action item for many of you is maybe when you get one of those ads to go back and say, can't you just produce groceries? Can't you just be providing a service? Can't I just buy my lumber without having to be assaulted by the whole Pride Month? And I think that's a reasonable request for most individuals.
Big time. I think people have been saying for a while that these boards of these companies have been really violating their shareholders' interest. Their job is to be, fiduciaries, and they're supposed to look after their shareholders. And instead, they've been pushing political agendas that is obviously going to harm. When you start taking sides on these type of cultural issues, you're now out of what you normally do, and you're going to offend a certain percentage of people. And it's really foolish from a business side. And I think we're seeing that turn back around. I mean, the good news of all this is the American people, when they finally speak, now they're a little slow sometimes because they're like, I don't know if I should talk about this. It looks like there's some controversy going on here. But after a while, they start to get their sea legs a little bit, and they start to get their courage, and they say, I don't like this. When they do, there's a response. And that's kind of what happened in our country.
Let me just mention before we run out of time that these articles are there, including the one by Matt Lamb and, of course, the Penedexter's commentary. If you'd like to receive hers, of course, you can sign up, and you just click on that button that says Read Now and never miss a viewpoint commentary. Mine comes out Monday through Friday to your inbox. The one I've written today is not to outsource our brains to AI, and we'll talk about that maybe sometime in the future. Hers is on Pride Slowing Momentum. If you'd like to know a little bit more about First Liberty, we, of course, have the link there, and we've given you some pretty good prayer targets. Maybe by next week you can tell us how some of those have turned out, right?
Well, especially the hearing coming up on Monday. We'll definitely be able to give a report on that. And then the Supreme Court, we're getting close to the end of the term, and so they're going to be announcing some pretty big decisions, and they're also going to be announcing whether they take some of these cases. The one we have, as you mentioned, next week it's a case on presenting the gospel and whether you can do that in a public park in the United States. So
I hope they take it.
You wouldn't think this would be an issue, but it is. And what a great precedent could be set that goes even beyond this case to really help every church, every person of faith across the country.
And again, while we're talking about LGBTQ, one of those cases comes out of Maryland. We're waiting for that Supreme Court case, but I'm simply out of time. So first of all, want to thank those who've been helping behind the scenes, and that is Doug and Megan. And Steve, thank you for joining with us and helping us and producing the program. Enjoy the weekend. Even by Monday, we know a little bit more, so hope you join us then right here on Point of View.
In 1972, Point of View was founded to address three needs in America. First, to create a trustworthy source of information without the liberal bias pervasive in the mainstream media. Second, to cover issues that real Americans needed to know about, issues impacting faith, family, and freedom. Finally, and most importantly, Point of View was founded to examine each issue from a Christian perspective, anchoring Americans to biblical truth once more. Thanks to support from people like you, Point of View has successfully carried out this mission for 53 years. But if we want to carry the mission forward into the future, we need your help today. This is a critical time of year. Point of View depends on listeners like you to donate generously. Forge ahead into the future with us. Give today at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.